When I signed the lease for the old house in Spokane, the landlord didn't ask a single question. No references, no job verification, just, "Can you move in by Friday?" That should have been a red flag, but I was broke and needed a place close to campus, so I said yes without thinking twice. The house was small but charming. Creaky wooden floors, arched doorways, and those weird old door handles you have to twist hard to open. Everything smelled like dust and lavender-scented cleaner. I didn't mind it until the third day when I was sweeping under the staircase and the broom knocked against something hollow. I crouched down, moved aside a few loose boards, and saw a tiny wooden hatch built into the wall. Painted the same dull green as the baseboard, it blended in completely. The lock was rusted, but the hatch opened easily. Inside was a room no more than 6 feet wide. It looked like a nursery. There was a single wooden crib in one corner, a rocking chair in another, and a baby mobile hanging from the ceiling. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, like no one had touched this place in decades. But what made it worse was how untouched it looked. The crib blanket was still spread out neatly, and the mobile was slightly tilted, as if it had just stopped spinning. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. I shut the hatch and didn't tell anyone. It felt like something I wasn't supposed to find. That night, while I lay in bed, I thought I heard something. Very faint, almost too soft to notice. A lullaby. I stayed completely still. The music was coming from under the stairs. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. The mobile couldn't have moved. It was probably just the house settling. Old houses make noises. The next morning, I forced myself to check. I opened the hatch slowly. The mobile was still, but this time, the blanket was folded, tucked in perfectly at the corners. My stomach dropped. I hadn't touched it, and I was the only one living there. I started digging online. I didn't find anything at first. The house was too old, and the property records were vague. But then I found a forum post from someone who had lived in the area for decades. They mentioned a baby going missing from that house in the 70s. No signs of forced entry, no ransom, no suspects, just gone. Her name was Elaine, 9 months old, disappeared without a trace in 1973. I went deeper. Library records, old newspaper scans, death notices. Same story. Elaine's parents had moved out within 2 weeks of the investigation closing. The case went cold, and the house had been rented to dozens of people since then. No one stayed more than a year. That night, I dreamed of a baby crying. It wasn't loud. It sounded like it was coming through a wall. I woke up drenched in sweat and with no memory of falling asleep. The next morning, I found the hatch open. I swear to God, I never touched it. And in front of it, on the floor, was a baby sock, pale pink, dusty, and slightly damp, like someone had held it in their palm. I moved out that same day, left half my stuff behind. I still think about that house. I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had gone into that room one more time, if I had waited long enough to hear the lullaby finish. But the worst part, sometimes, in other places, in other homes, I swear I still hear it. That same melody, just faintly, under the stairs. When I moved into the top floor apartment in Providence, Rhode Island, the listing said it came unfurnished. So I was surprised to find a small wooden chair in the corner of the living room. It wasn't a nice chair. It looked handmade, like something someone's grandfather would build. Crooked legs, dark oak, and dozens of scratch marks across the backrest. The kind of chair you don't touch, but don't throw out either. I assumed the landlord just forgot it, so I pushed it into a corner and moved on. That night, I started hearing faint thumps from the living room. Nothing alarming, just the soft noise of something shifting, the kind of sound you'd hear if someone sat down and stood back up again. I chalked it up to old floorboards reacting to the cold, but every morning when I'd get up, the chair had moved a few inches. I thought maybe I was bumping it without realizing. I even marked its position with tape, but each morning, the scratch marks on the floor grew longer, and the chair drifted closer to the hallway. I finally called the landlord to complain about the noises. I casually mentioned the chair and asked if they could come get it. He paused, then said, "What chair?" I sent a picture. 10 minutes later, he was at my door. He walked straight to the chair, stood in front of it for a moment, and then said, "I need to take this now." I asked what was wrong with it. He didn't answer, just picked it up, walked out, and didn't even say goodbye. I thought that would be the end of it, but that night, I woke up to the sound of scraping wood. I turned on the light and froze. The chair was back in the hallway, facing my bedroom door. I checked the front door, locked, windows sealed. I live alone. Last year, I took a shared rental in Charleston, South Carolina. It was a 3-bedroom place, but only one roommate was there when I moved in, Tara. She was nice, quiet, and kept to herself. She told me the 3rd room was locked because the last tenant had left some of their stuff and hadn't picked it up yet. I didn't think much of it. Over the first week, I barely saw Tara. I'd hear her in the kitchen or bathroom, but every time I looked, no one was there. I figured our schedules just didn't match, but then I started noticing odd things. A spoon left in the sink when I hadn't eaten. The hallway light turning off in the middle of the night. My shampoo bottle moved 3 inches to the left. I blamed it on Tara. Maybe she was just really quiet. But one day, I heard whispering coming from the wall. Not the room, inside the wall. Like a muffled voice pressed directly against the plaster. It didn't say words, just a rhythm, like someone counting or humming. I confronted Tara about it the next morning. She looked at me like I was insane. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I'm not Tara. I moved in last night. I thought you were the one already living here." I stared at her, dead silent. There was no furniture in her room, no signs anyone had lived there before. She hadn't met any landlord. She said the door was just open. We both packed and left that same day. A week later, I looked up the property history. The last official tenant was a woman named Tara, who went missing 10 months earlier. The landlord died shortly after she vanished, and the 3rd bedroom, police sealed it. It had a vent that connected to the walls with fingerprints all over the inside.